The list of the top 10 players in women's college basketball history. Um, do I have a problem with any of this?
She broke every record they told her she couldn't break. She carried teams that had no business being on that stage. She did it without the roster, without the pedigree, without the dynasty. And still, 2 years after she left college basketball, people are still talking about her, still arguing, still trying to figure out how to place her on a list that, frankly, was never built to contain what she became. This is not just a ranking story. This is the story of a player who redefined what one human being can do for a program, for a sport, and for a generation of fans who had never watched a women's college basketball game before she showed up and made it impossible to look away. We are talking about Caitlin Clark, and the list is back. The top 10 players in women's college basketball history has resurfaced, and the internet, as it always does, has caught fire. Some people think the ranking is fair, some people think it is criminal, and a very loud, very specific group of people are doing what they always do when Caitlin Clark's name appears next to greatness. They are finding reasons to push back. They are finding reasons to say she does not belong at the top. And today, we are going to go through every single one of those arguments and explain exactly why this ranking, this conversation, and this moment is bigger than any list could ever capture. Let us start at the beginning, because to understand why this ranking matters, you first have to understand what women's college basketball looked like before Caitlin Clark walked into Iowa's Carver Hawkeye Arena as a freshman. The sport existed, people watched, programs were dominant, but the average sports fan, the person who follows college football on Saturday and the NBA on Sunday, they were not tuning in. They were not buying jerseys. They were not filling arenas. They were not creating a traffic problem on streaming services during a Tuesday night Big Ten game. That all changed with one player. Caitlin Clark did not just play basketball, she performed it. She pulled up from the logo, she dribbled coast to coast and finished through contact. She passed with her eyes in the back of her head. She talked, she celebrated. She welcomed the pressure of massive moments and then delivered in them in ways that made highlight reels feel like they were not doing justice to what actually happened. She was appointment television in a sport that had been fighting for prime time for decades. And she did it at Iowa. Iowa! A program that before Clark was respected but was not a powerhouse, was not a dynasty, was not the kind of place that produced the #1 pick in the draft or sent players to the All-Star game in bunches. She showed up, and within 2 years she had that program in a Final Four. Within 4 years, she had taken them to back-to-back national championship games, 2 consecutive trips to the biggest stage in college basketball, and she did it. This is the part that gets lost in the noise. She did it with a roster that, by WNBA standards, barely had one legitimate professional prospect outside of herself. Think about that. Think about what that actually means when you sit down and compare it to the other names on this list. Breanna Stewart, Stewie, is right there with Clark at the very top of this debate, and rightfully so. What Breanna Stewart did at UConn was extraordinary. 4 national championships, 4 for 4, undefeated runs, dominant performances on the biggest stages. She is one of the greatest players in the history of the sport, full stop. But here's the thing that the debate always circles back to. Breanna Stewart had one of the greatest supporting casts ever assembled in college basketball. She played alongside Mariah Jefferson, who was a top 2 pick in the WNBA draft. She played alongside Sania Chong, Gabby Williams, Katie Lou Samuelson, Morgan Tuck, player after player after player who went on to professional careers. UConn in those years was not just a college basketball team, it was a pre-assembled WNBA roster wearing college uniforms. Stewart was the best player on that team by a wide margin, but she was never doing it alone. Caitlin Clark was alone, not figuratively, literally. When analysts sat down and counted the legitimate WNBA caliber players on Iowa's roster during Clark's title runs, the number they kept arriving at was 1. Maybe 1.7 if you want to be generous about it and count a player who might last a couple more years in the league at the end of the bench. Kate Martin was a good player, a hard-working, gritty, culture-building player who earned every minute she was on the floor. But the gap between Kate Martin and what Caitlin Clark was doing was the gap between a solid role player and a generational talent. And yet, Clark willed that team to the championship game not once, twice. The 2023 run alone should have settled this debate. Iowa entered that tournament facing an LSU team that had just won a national championship and then gone out and gotten more dangerous. They added Michaela Williams. They added Ania Maiterei. Take a team that already won a title and surround it with more talent. That is a scary proposition for anyone standing across from them on the court. And Flau'jae Johnson had improved. Angel Reese was playing with purpose and power. That LSU team was a legitimate title contender, not a warm-up act. And Caitlin Clark and Iowa knocked them out and got to the final. They didn't win in 2023, and that's the #1 bullet point in the anti-Clark argument. She never won a championship. She went 2 for 2 to the final and came home empty-handed. For some people, that's the end of the conversation. You don't belong at the top if you didn't finish. But here's where that argument starts to fall apart when you actually pressure test it. In 2023, Iowa had a real chance to win that game. Gabby Marshall was not herself. Monica Czinano got into foul trouble at exactly the wrong moments. Alexis Morris, coming off the LSU bench, had one of those nights that no defense can prepare for. The kind of night where a player makes shots that they have no right to make, and the scoreboard moves in ways that defy logic. And even with all of that happening against Iowa, the game was close enough that a few possessions going differently would have changed everything. Clark ran out of steam in the fourth quarter. That happens. She was the only one carrying the weight of the entire program on her shoulders for 4 years. That it got to that point, that Iowa was in the building for that final, that was her. And then, 2024, the second championship game. By this point, Caitlin Clark had become the most talked about player in the sport, and the pressure that came with that was unlike anything any college basketball player had experienced in the modern media environment. She scored 18 points in the first quarter of the national semifinal against a South Carolina team that had Camila Cardosa, a player who was simply too physically dominant for anyone Iowa had to match up against. Think about that. 18 points in one quarter on the biggest stage against the team that would go on to win the championship. She wasn't just competing, she was putting on a performance. Iowa lost that game, and Caitlin Clark left college basketball without a ring. But the argument that losing to better-equipped programs somehow diminishes what she did is the same argument that would ask you to say LeBron James wasn't a great player in 2018 when he lost to the Golden State Warriors in the finals when his second-best player was Jeff Green. It's the same argument that dismisses Jimmy Butler's entire playoff legacy because he couldn't beat the powerhouses without enough help. The ring is not the only measuring stick. The carry job is part of the story too. Now, the records, because we can't have this conversation without talking about what Caitlin Clark did statistically, because what she did statistically will simply never happen again. She broke the NCAA all-time scoring record, not the women's record, the all-time record, men and women combined. She surpassed Pete Maravich, who set his mark in an era without a shot clock, playing 40 games a year against competition that was dramatically different from what Clark faced. She surpassed the record while also missing a significant portion of her freshman year due to COVID, a shortened season, and she still got there. She still broke it. She did it with her name attached to the story in a way that made the breaking of that record a national sports moment, not a women's basketball moment, a sports moment. Her points per game numbers were extraordinary. Her assist totals redefined what a scorer in the college game could do when she decided to facilitate. She could light up the scoreboard and she could make everyone around her better at the same time. She was not a ball stopper. She was the basketball version of a floor raiser, a player whose presence expanded the floor so dramatically that every other player on her team had more space to operate, more opportunities to score, more room to breathe. That is a specific and elite skill that very few players in the history of the sport, men's or women's, have possessed. And the argument being made by people who study the game closely is that Caitlin Clark is the greatest floor raiser in the history of women's college basketball. Not the greatest winner, not the greatest champion, the greatest floor raiser. The player who could take what was around her and make it look like more than it was through the sheer force of her offensive presence and creativity. Is that the same as being the greatest player who ever played? No, and the honest version of that argument acknowledges that. But top 10? Absolutely. Number 1, there is a real and legitimate case to be made, and the people who dismiss it entirely are not engaging with the evidence, they are engaging with the narrative. Let's talk about Brittany Griner for a second, because one of the interesting conversations in this ranking is whether Griner belongs higher than 7th. And honestly, that's a reasonable question. Brittany Griner at Baylor was something the sport had genuinely never seen before. She was so physically dominant, so ahead of everyone around her in terms of size and athletic ability, that there were semi-serious conversations, not jokes, actual conversations about whether she could be drafted into the NBA. That's not hyperbole. That's how good Brittany Griner was. She is arguably still the greatest pure prospect ever to come out of the women's college game.